Thank you for joining us. We are in our webinar on the effects of the pandemic from an expanded reason perspective. So today with us, we have professors from the University of Francisco de Vitoria, primarily, and other friends of the university and members of our larger community, expanded reason, that are joining us via the internet. So thank you very much, Dr. Catherine Pakaluk, who is joining us from the United States.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you.
Let me, for those who don't know you, let me introduce you a little bit and tell them who you are. Catherine Pakaluk is Assistant Professor of Social Research and Economic Thought at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Her primary areas of research include economics of education and religion, family studies, demography, political economy, and Catholic social thought. Pakaluk is the 2015 winner of the Acton Institute's Novak Award for significant contributions to the study of the relationship between religion and economic liberty. Pakaluk did her doctoral work at Harvard University under 2016 Nobel laureate Oliver Hart and has co-authored highly cited articles in social science and epidemiological journals, including Demography, Economic Inquiry, and the Journal of the National Cancer Institute. She's currently writing a book on motive and meaning among America's high fertility women. She splits her time between the mountains of New Hampshire, from where she joined us today, and suburban Maryland, with her husband Michael and 8 children. So welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. Let me begin by asking you about a broad question about how do you see the impact of the pandemic on your professional life? How it has changed it? Now, of course, I'm not talking about going online. I'm talking about your thought on your research work and your perspective. Has that been affected at all by the pandemic?
A little bit. So, but I would like to say that I think I'm struggling with some of the same things that many of us are struggling with. I mean, this sense in some ways that the social responses to the virus among my colleagues in the profession and professional economists, that in many ways they revealed a division that was maybe already present, that I believed was present already. And what I struggle with is the sense that, to me personally, it feels that the responses I observe among other colleagues only kind of confirm what I thought about some of my fellow economists. I worry about that because we worry in general about the way in which public shocks kind of only confirm or deepen things that we already believed. So this has been a little bit difficult for me, meaning, in economics, in the post-war period from about 1940 to 1960, there was a kind of real revolution of science and economics, and really a certain side of that debate kind of won the day, if you will. And more or less the kind of Keynesian stream of economists won that debate, and they hold most of the distinguished university chairs now, and so on and so forth, with another group, a more minority group, that believed more in a kind of market process approach. And in this particular pandemic, I mean, professionally, we see that the divisions among economists have followed those divisions very closely, the responses, the preferred policy approach. So I have struggled a little bit to feel that what I'm observing is like a deepening, an entrenchment of divisions, which were already unfortunate to begin with,
Could you explain them a little bit for those who are not in economics?
Yeah, so, I think we can call them like Chicago School economists. Some of them had connections with the London School of Economics. People associated with schools of thought considered free market, or more agnostic about strong policy approaches, the ability of the government, of the Federal Reserve, for instance, to kind of manipulate aggregate outcomes in the economy for better. That kind of division was existing, after the war. It really predated the war, but the seeds of that division predated the war period, but it became very deep afterwards. And on some level, you can think of that culminating at a time when someone like James Buchanan, who did win the Nobel Prize in economics in 1960, more or less. He gave a distinguished lecture saying, what is it that economists should be doing? Should they be kind of managing the economy like fancy engineers that come up with, the right equations, and then, they move the levers like a big, and on some level wrote such a already he was in a sense conceding defeat, that his view, which is that what economists should be doing is studying human action and thinking about all of the things which influence human action, with a little bit more of a humility, stepping back from the idea of controlling the economy like a big machine. He already conceded in 1964 that that side of the debate kind of was losing the debate, And at that time, many people that agreed with Buchanan still held distinguished chairs at universities, but it's no longer true. So more of this like engineering technocratic approach is the dominant approach among many economists. So I have seen with some encouragement some signs now of some debates between maybe the intellectual descendants of someone like James Buchanan uh, against some of the intellectual dependents of Keynes. The Reason Institute hosted a very nice debate between two economists on the subject, and the subject of the policy response to the lockdowns. But in terms of just the takeaway message for me, just this concern that um, that the crisis just made it more depressing, in a sense, that we aren't speaking to each other in a way that I would wish that we were speaking to each other. Um, so that is concerning. I saw language, the kind of language that we worry about. Um, people on one side saying the people on the other side are not real scientists, not um, no, I mean, I can understand disagreeing, but opponents are not real scientists. That kind of language that was very worrying. But because I hope we can talk for a few minutes about the subject of fear. But so many of these kind of responses to the epidemic have pushed people in a direction to be maybe less reasonable than usual. Yeah.
What do you mean by, fear of getting sick, or fear of the political uh, plays that may happen later on? What do you mean?
Oh yeah, I mean it in a very basic human sense. What seems to me that people are very afraid of being sick and dying, which is a natural fear. I don't criticize it in anybody, but it seems that in every place where I had a chance to be having a conversation, um, that it was harder than usual to have a, a reasonable conversation. I don't mean that by reasonable that people would agree with me, but by reasonable that the elements of conversation, the institutions of conversation, a kind of civility and a patience and a willingness to discuss, facts on the table, that seemed harder than ever. It's been hard. It's already been hard before this, but it was harder than usual.
I should
Mm,
clarify to our audience that
yeah.
who may not know what the U.S. environment has been
Mhm.
lately. It's a little bit different from the European one. In the U.S., there has been a great deal of acrimony and division among people who have somehow politicized the fact that people are getting sick. And the response about whether a government should be involved, telling people to stay home or not, is a very difficult issue. It is also true in Spain and in other European countries. Germany is having problems now with that. In Spain too. Near my house, we have protests
Yes.
happening every few nights, protesting the government lockdown, which has been almost two
Yeah.
months long. So
Yeah.
it's much more stringent than US, but it's been a lot better received, or more dutifully
Yes.
received by the people than in the
Yeah.
United States.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, this raises, this bigger question for me personally. I think somebody that does a lot of science work and that loves numbers like me, I mean, from a young age, at the beginning of this thing in March, after I got my classes set up to teach remotely, I thought, okay, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to read everything. There's going to be an answer here. There's going to be enough science, and in another few months, we'll know the answers. So first I just started reading everything, and even in my personal life and in my church community, you had many people asking questions which seemed like just honest questions. Here's a logarithmic growth. Help me understand what these charts look like, and how should I read these numbers? And I thought, like a naive person, the idea is just to explain the numbers. But I was very surprised back in March already that for some people it wasn't welcome to hear just here's how you can read this. And normally in epidemiology, as we do more testing, we discover case fatality rates usually go down. I mean, at the beginning they're very high. We're just testing the very sick people. But just to say this, which is a fact in epidemiology, was made people very angry. And that's when I went home and I thought, okay, this is not a question now of just let's get the truth out. It's much deeper than that, and I'm still thinking about that. I don't know the answer, but
Do you
it's
know
much
why they were
deeper.
angry?
I don't know. I'm thinking about one particular person that I was in conversation with. She was angry because she said, "Well, I'm in high risk, and you don't take seriously that I want to be scared." I said, "No, I mean, I just we're talking about the numbers here, and I think it's not as bad as you say." Oh, she was very angry. Um, I think she was angry because she was concerned that my point of view, that the numbers, we had reason to be optimistic about the numbers. She was concerned that that optimism would lead to softer policies, and she wanted very strong policies because she was afraid. That's reasonable. It's a kind of reason, but it made the conversation about the numbers almost impossible to have. Yeah.
Has your have you've been teaching all this time?
Yes.
Have your students reacted in a particular way, and how have you seen or perceived something different from them or
Among
your
this.
colleagues, your
Yeah.
professor colleagues?
Yeah, generally, apart from these kind of debates I'm describing, I've been involved with a few debates in my community and also in some online. But apart from that, just among my students and my colleagues at the university, I have found what I think is like a deep something I admire in the American spirit in general, which is Americans are very pragmatic. They're very like, well, we're going to solve this. So what are we going to do? So actually, I don't see. I know, there are some pockets. I don't see a lot of resistance to taking reasonable measures. People want to wear. They just want to know, what can I do? So they wear a mask. They stay home. My colleagues are um, very interested in finding ways that we can teach safely, that we can make it possible for older professors or people who might be at more risk to stay home. I mean, those things are very inspiring and makes me very proud that we have. But I will say that one frustration among some, I would say in academia, it's not so difficult, but in among businessmen in this country, businesswomen, some of the more strict states, the states with more strict policies about business, have made it impossible for some of that American spirit to operate because the business owners are not allowed to find a way, right? So they say, well, look, I have 10 ways that it's going to be safe, but the government says, no, it's not safe. So I think that's what's happening here is you have a lot of like pragmatic enthusiasm, like we're gonna find a way to make this work, and so it's coming up. It's coming up in different places. My students were mostly depressed to lack the human interactions of school. They missed each other, and for me, that was a big moment to discover that the thing I could offer my students wasn't myself. Initially I thought, because I didn't ever teach online before, so I thought, well, I'll record some lectures and post them someplace, and that way they can do anything they want in the day. They can watch the lecture anytime that they want. But they really wanted to meet together at the same time. And I realized it wasn't that they wanted to see me. They do, they want to see me, but they wanted to see each other. And that was for me very powerful to see that they feel very much the loss of their friends and the physical connection. So they can look on some terrible screen and they see each other, and that was the thing I could give them, because without me leading the class, they couldn't connect. Yeah.
Okay. Um, do you um, do you recognize that any questions that are new to you now, or that you had not asked before, or that seem important to you, but or not important before, but now they do?
Yes. Okay. So one that's really interesting to me, it begins in my mind many years ago, maybe now 15 years, when I had a colleague, when I was still in graduate school, and I was expecting my third baby, and I was, pregnant and in the department. And one of my colleagues said to me, "Wow, like the third baby, she said, "Do you think that's healthy for you?" And I kind of, I was a little bit shocked, like and I kind of smiled and I thought, well, of course, like for my legs, it's not very healthy. I have some problems with my legs, but it got me to thinking for a long time about how do we define what's healthy, like what's healthfulness? Because for me, it's a very healthy thing to have, 4 or 5 healthy children, they're happy, yeah, my body is not the same, but that's the purpose of my body, to give life. Um, but I've realized in the time since then how much more, as scientists, we don't have a holistic idea of health that includes those things. So why with the pandemic? Well, because in the US at least, we've been talking about very long-term measures of change, like, so we had people in the hospitals dying alone without family members, people giving birth without their husband or other family members with them, and thinking about the elderly being completely isolated. So it made me to think, like, well, the univariable health has to have some kind of broader concept, right? Because we're going to see these suicides and people very depressed because we're not meant to be alone. But in fact, we don't have good measures for what's health in this sense. So for me, that's something that I'm very interested in understanding better, how we can um, include I don't know, holistic is the word that comes to mind, but it's a little bit of a cliche word, a more rich idea of human health.
Okay. Let me ask you one final question.
Yeah.
Do you have any proposals from your field of study that require real dialogue with other disciplines, perhaps even philosophy and theology, to give a comprehensive, a deeper response to the reality we live in?
Yeah, I mean, this one right away, I mean, this idea of health, I think, needs conversation with philosophy and theology, but one which is related to the question of health, which is related to these end of life questions, like, I mean, all these people who are passing away very sadly, and we know mostly elderly people. Um, this question of what makes life worth living. My field by itself doesn't have an answer for this. We talk a lot about the insufficiency of the economic model, and Homo economicus is, like a kind of narrow, and I'm a big defender of the use of the Homo economicus, but um, at the end, we have to operate with something that um, captures these more deep realities. What makes life worth living? I mean, if I ever see another human being for 3 years or 5 years, is it a life that was worth living? Um, I think we need to spend more time on these questions, and theologians, religious scholars, in fact, not even just scholars, but ministers and rabbis and people who work with people of deep faith. I mean, I think they may have a lot to tell us right now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakaluk. It is wonderful to have you. Thank you very much.
Very good.